Before you move to the Philippines, make sure you watch this first. Moving to the Philippines can be an amazing decision, but it's worth pausing to think things through first. Here are the common mistakes many Americans make before relocating, and the ones they often regret right after arriving. We're going deep into everything you need to know before moving to the islands so you can dodge costly mistakes and make smarter, more confident decisions, backed by insights from The Earth Awaits, Numbeo, and livingcost.org. Stick with us until the end, because we'll reveal the one mistake Americans make before moving that they almost always regret. I thought moving to the Philippines would instantly make my money problems disappear. The idea sounded simple enough. It's cheap, so I'll be fine. That one sentence became the entire plan. I pictured lower rent, inexpensive food, and a slower pace of life that wouldn't drain my bank account the way it did back home. On paper, everything checked out. Cost of living charts made it look like I'd have more than enough to live comfortably, maybe even better than before. But that expectation left out one critical detail. Lifestyle determines cost. I didn't fully realize that at first because I wasn't thinking about how I actually lived day to day. I still wanted comfort, reliable air conditioning, a modern condo, familiar groceries, and the convenience of eating out regularly. None of those things felt excessive to me. They felt normal. But in a new country, normal can come with a very different price tag. Little by little, the numbers started shifting. Rent in desirable areas wasn't as low as I imagined. Utility bills climbed, especially with daily AC use. Imported products cost significantly more than local ones. Even casual spending, coffee runs, delivery fees, weekend trips began stacking up faster than expected. The gap between what I thought I'd spend and what I was actually spending kept widening. That's when the bigger truth became impossible to ignore. Cheap countries aren't cheap if you try to live comfortably without planning. The Philippines can absolutely be affordable, but only if your lifestyle aligns with that goal. There's a spectrum from living simply and locally to maintaining a Western-style standard of living. And each step along that spectrum changes your monthly cost dramatically. Looking back, the mistake wasn't moving. It was assuming that lower prices alone would guarantee financial ease. Without a clear plan and an honest look at my habits, cheap became relative. And that's exactly where most people get caught off guard. I realized pretty quickly that not all places in the Philippines are created equal, and choosing the wrong one can cost more than you expect. At first, I didn't think location would make that big of a difference. The country looked small on a map, and I assumed the experience and the costs would be relatively the same wherever I went. But the reality hit as soon as I started comparing places like Manila, Cebu, and the smaller islands. Manila is fast-paced, dense, and packed with conveniences, malls, hospitals, international restaurants, and business hubs. But all that accessibility comes at a price. Higher rent, heavier traffic, and a more expensive daily lifestyle. Cebu offers a middle ground. It still has urban comforts, but with a more relaxed pace and, in many cases, slightly lower costs. Then there are the islands, beautiful, quieter, and often cheaper on the surface, but with limited infrastructure, fewer services, and added challenges when it comes to transportation, healthcare, and reliable internet. That's where the real trade-off shows up. Convenience versus cost. Living in a major city might stretch your budget, but it saves you time, gives you access to essentials, and makes daily life smoother. On the other hand, living in a more remote area might lower your rent, but you could end up spending more in other ways, traveling for basic services, dealing with inconsistent utilities, or sacrificing comfort and efficiency. It became clear that I wasn't just choosing a place, I was choosing a lifestyle, and each location came with its own hidden costs, not just financially, but in time, energy, and overall quality of life. That's when the biggest lesson settled in. Where you live matters more than how much you spend. Because even if you manage to save money on paper, it won't mean much if your day-to-day life becomes inconvenient, stressful, or disconnected from what you actually need. Picking the right location isn't just about price, it's about aligning your environment with how you want to live. Stick around, we're just getting started. We haven't touched on how daily life in the country can affect your lifestyle. No one warns you that it's the little things that hit you hardest in the Philippines. At first, everything feels manageable, even exciting, but then daily life settles in, and that's where the real adjustment begins. Take traffic, for example. It's not just a bit busy, it can completely reshape your day. Short distances turn into long, unpredictable commutes. What looks like a 15-minute ride on the map can easily stretch into an hour, especially in busier cities. Over time, that lost time adds up, eating into your productivity and patience. Then there's infrastructure. It's not about whether things exist, it's about how consistently they work. Internet speeds can vary depending on where you are. Power outages, while not constant, do happen in certain areas. Water pressure, road conditions, and public transport reliability can all fluctuate. None of these issues are deal breakers on their own, but together they create a level of unpredictability that you have to plan around. Walkability is another surprise. In many areas, especially outside well-developed districts, walking isn't always practical. Sidewalks can be uneven, narrow, or sometimes non-existent. Crossing streets can feel like a challenge, and the heat alone makes long walks exhausting. So even simple errands often require transportation, which loops you right back into dealing with traffic again. Individually, these might seem like small inconveniences, but stacked together, day after day, they start to wear on you. Plans take longer. Simple tasks require more effort. Routines you once took for granted suddenly need adjusting. And that's the part most people overlook. It's not the big things, it's the daily friction that wears people down. Living in the Philippines can still be incredibly rewarding, but only if you understand what everyday life actually feels like, not just what it looks like on paper or in travel videos. Because once the novelty fades, it's your daily experience that determines whether you thrive or struggle. I didn't expect comfort to be the thing that quietly drained my budget the fastest. At the beginning, I focused on the obvious expenses: rent, food, transportation. Those look manageable, even surprisingly low. But what I didn't fully account for were the upgrades I'd start reaching for once daily life settled in. Not luxuries, just comfort, the kind I was used to without thinking twice. Air conditioning was the first wake-up call. In a tropical climate, it's not really optional if you want to sleep well or stay productive. Running it for a few hours a day seemed harmless at first until the electricity bill arrived. Then I realized that comfort, in this case, wasn't built into the base cost. It was layered on top. Reliable internet was next. I assumed I could just get connected and move on, but consistency matters more than speed on paper. If you work online or rely on stable calls and uploads, you quickly start looking for better plans, backup connections, or living in areas where service is stronger. Each of those choices nudges your monthly costs higher. Then came housing. Sure, there are plenty of affordable options, but affordable doesn't always mean comfortable. Modern housing with good insulation, consistent water supply, backup power, and decent furnishings exists, but it sits at a different price point. The gap between basic living and comfortable living is wider than it first appears. That's when the pattern became clear. Every time I tried to recreate the level of comfort I was used to, I had to pay extra for it. Bit by bit, those upgrades stacked together. AC usage, better internet, improved housing, and reshaped my budget in ways I hadn't planned for. And that's the truth most people don't realize going in. Comfort isn't standard, it's something you pay for. The Philippines can absolutely offer a great quality of life, but only if you're clear about what comfort means to you and how much it actually costs to maintain it. Otherwise, it's easy to underestimate just how quickly those invisible upgrades turn into very real expenses. Keep watching to discover what expecting US level systems living on the island can do to you. I learned the hard way that expecting things to work like they do in the US will frustrate you fast. At first, I didn't even realize I was carrying those expectations with me. I assumed systems would be just as efficient, processes just as streamlined, and service just as quick. It wasn't arrogance, it was habit. I was used to things moving at a certain pace, with clear steps and predictable outcomes. But then I started dealing with everyday tasks. Something as simple as setting up a service, handling paperwork, or you're resolving a billing issue took longer than I expected. Not because people weren't trying, but because the systems themselves worked differently. There were more steps, more waiting, and sometimes less clarity on timelines. Efficiency, I realized, isn't universal, it's contextual. Processes can feel less direct. You might be asked for additional documents you didn't anticipate, or need to follow up more than once to get things moving. What would normally be a quick one-step task back home can turn into a multi-step process that unfolds over days instead of hours. Then there's service speed, whether it's in restaurants, offices, or customer support. Things often move at a more relaxed pace. It's not necessarily poor service, it's just a different rhythm. Once I stopped measuring everything against what I was used to, it became easier to understand that the pace wasn't wrong, it was just different. At first, that gap between expectation and reality created constant friction. Small delays felt bigger than they were. Minor inconveniences felt like major obstacles, but over time, the real shift wasn't in the system, it was in my mindset. Because the truth is simple, the faster you adjust expectations, the easier your life becomes. Once I stopped expecting everything to match US level systems and started working with how things actually function, daily life became far less stressful. It didn't mean lowering standards, it meant adapting to a different environment so I could move through it more smoothly instead of constantly pushing against it. Make sure to watch all the way through. You won't believe what would happen if you failed to plan for your income properly. I didn't realize how fragile my income plan was until it actually had to support my life. At the start, everything looked solid on paper. I had savings, a remote income stream, and a rough monthly budget that seemed more than enough for life in the Philippines. With lower living costs, it felt like I had a cushion, but what I didn't plan for was how quickly things can shift when your income isn't as stable as you thought. Remote work instability was the first crack. Projects slowed down, payments got delayed, and some opportunities disappeared without much warning. What used to feel consistent suddenly became unpredictable, and when your income fluctuates, even slightly, it hits differently when you're living abroad and relying entirely on it. Then the budget mismatch started to show. My estimates were based on ideal months, steady income, controlled spending, no surprises, but real life doesn't work like that. Expenses went over. Some costs were higher than expected, especially when comfort and convenience came into play. Without a stable baseline income, even small gaps between what I earned and what I spent started to stack up. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that things would stabilize, that I'd adjust, but as the uncertainty stretched on, the pressure built. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was about sustainability. How long could I keep this going if income stayed inconsistent? That's when the thought quietly started creeping in. What if this doesn't work long term? And that's the turning point for a lot of people, because this is where most people start thinking about leaving. Not because the Philippines failed them, but because their financial plan wasn't strong enough to handle real-world conditions. Moving abroad amplifies whatever weaknesses exist in your income strategy. If it's unstable, unclear, or overly optimistic, those issues surface fast. Looking back, the lesson was clear. It's not enough to have income. You need predictable, well-planned income that can absorb fluctuations and still cover your lifestyle. Without that, even a cheap place can become financially stressful. And once that stress sets in, it changes the entire experience of living there. You'll want to see what happens should you skip the test phase when relocating to the island. Trust me, I made one of the biggest mistakes you can make when moving abroad. I skipped the test phase entirely. Instead of easing in, I treated the move like a final decision from day one. I arrived with long-term intentions already in mind, convinced I had done enough research to commit fully. In my head, there was no need to try it out. I was ready. That mindset felt confident at the time, but it also removed any room for adjustment once reality set in. Moving long-term without a trial period sounds efficient, but it ignores how unpredictable daily life can actually feel on the ground. Things that look great in theory can feel very different when you're living them every day. Neighborhood noise levels, internet reliability, commute times, even how you respond to the climate, none of that fully reveals itself until you've actually spent time there without pressure. But I didn't give myself that space. I locked into decisions too early, especially when it came to housing. Instead of staying flexible, I committed to leases before I fully understood which areas I actually wanted to live in. That removed my ability to adapt quickly when I realized certain locations didn't match my lifestyle. Once you're locked in, changing course isn't just inconvenient, it can be expensive and stressful. That's when it really hit me how much I had compressed the timeline. I wasn't just living in a new country, I had already anchored myself in it without truly knowing if it fit. And that's the core issue behind it all. Most regret comes from committing too fast. A proper test phase isn't about hesitation, it's about information. It gives you time to understand your environment, adjust your expectations, and make decisions based on experience instead of assumptions. Without it, you're essentially guessing with long-term consequences. Looking back, the smarter approach would have been simple. Stay flexible, explore different areas, and delay major commitments until I actually understood what daily life felt like. Because once you commit too quickly, you don't just lose flexibility, you lose the ability to correct course without cost. What we reveal to be the real mistake Americans make before moving to the country might just startle you. The real mistake Americans make before moving to the Philippines isn't cost or location, it's how they think about the entire move. Most people treat it like a single decision, a yes or no moment. They decide, pack up, and commit as if everything will fall into place after landing. But that's where things start to go wrong. They commit too early, locking themselves into housing, budgets, and expectations before they've actually experienced daily life. They don't test the lifestyle in a real way. And instead of validating their assumptions on the ground, they rely on research, videos, and projections that don't always match reality. That gap between expectation and experience is where regret starts to build. Because the people who actually succeed abroad don't guess, they experiment first. And that's where a smarter approach comes in. What I call the 3-step relocation system. Step 1 is simple. Test the country for 1 to 3 months, not as a tourist, but by living normally. Grocery shopping, commuting, handling errands, dealing with real routines. That's when you see what daily life actually feels like. Step 2 is designing your lifestyle. This is where you decide how you actually want to live, your location, your routine, your comfort level, and what you're willing to pay for. Not based on assumptions, but based on what you've already experienced. Step 3 is scaling your commitment. Instead of going all in immediately, you move from month-to-month arrangements into longer-term decisions only once you're confident. That flexibility lets you adjust without locking yourself into costly mistakes. This one shift alone prevents 90% of expat regret, because most regret doesn't come from the country, it comes from the speed of commitment. The Philippines can absolutely work. It can offer an incredible lifestyle, lower costs, and a completely different pace of life, but only if you approach it the right way, slow enough to understand it, flexible enough to adapt, and intentional enough to build something that actually lasts. If you want to understand life in the Philippines on a deeper level, check out our other videos where we break down the real expat experience in the country.